Hello, sports fans. Welcome to Super Sports Central. Today, we're going to be going over my Week 10 NFL Power Rankings. So, going over last week's rankings and what those teams did in Week 9. Last week, at number 10, I had the Eagles. They beat the Jaguars 28-23. 9 was the Steelers. They were on a bye. 8, I had the Commanders. They beat the Giants by a score of 27-22. 7 was the Vikings. They beat the Colts 21-13. 6 was the Ravens. They demolished the Broncos 41-10. 5 was the Texans. They beat the Jets 21-13. 4, I had the Packers. They lost to the Lions 24-14. Third, I had the Bills. They beat the Dolphins 30-27. 2 was the Lions. They beat the Packers 24-14. And 1 was the Chiefs, who beat the Buccaneers in overtime 30-24. Getting into this week's rankings, beginning things at number 10, I've got the Eagles. So the Eagles remained at number 10 after they beat the Jaguars 28-23. The Eagles did let the Jaguars back into this game, but they were able to hold on for the win. The offense played well for the Eagles, and they ran the ball very effectively. Saquon Barkley had a big game as both a runner and a receiver, as he had 159 rushing yards and a touchdown, and then as a receiver had 3 catches for 40 yards and another score. And Barkley was a big part of a great Eagles run game that had 237 yards and 2 touchdowns, while averaging 5.2 yards per carry. Then the defense for the Eagles was great in the first half, not so great in the second, but the Eagles, they were able to get the win, and they remained at number 10. Ninth, I have the Steelers. So the Steelers, they remain at number 9. They were on a bye. Next week, they visit the Commanders. 8th, I have the Texans. So the Texans fall to number 8 after they lost to the Jets 21-13. The Texans, they did not play well offensively. CJ Stroud struggled, completing just 11 of his 30 passes for 191 yards. Now, a big reason Stroud did not play well is the Texans' offensive line was awful, as they allowed 8 sacks and Stroud was under constant pressure. Now, the Texans did run the football pretty well, rushing for 187 yards and a touchdown, and Tank Dell stepped up at the receiver position with Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs both out, as Tank Dell had 6 catches for 126 yards. And then defensively for the Texans, they were okay. They weren't terrible, but weren't great. But the offense, but more specifically, the offensive line was awful for the Texans, and a big reason they lost this game. Texans, they fall to number 8. 7th, I have the Packers. So the Packers fall to number 7 after they lost to the Lions 24-14, and it was not a good performance for the Packers. There was a lot of mistakes, as there was a lot of drop passes. They had 10 penalties, and they struggled in the red zone, scoring just 1 touchdown on 4 red zone trips. Jordan Love was decent, throwing for 273 yards, but he had a horrible pick 6, and definitely wasn't completely healthy and still bothered by his groin injury. The Packers did run the football fairly effectively, rushing for 6 yards per carry. And then the Packers' defense was pretty good, allowing just 261 yards. But the Packers, after a mistake-filled game and a loss to the Lions, they're now at number 7. 6th, I have the Vikings. So the Vikings enter at number 7, and they get back in the win column after they beat the Colts by a score of 21-13. It wasn't the best win for the Vikings, but they were able to get the win after back-to-back losses. Sam Darnold played pretty well, throwing for 290 yards and 3 touchdowns, although he did throw 2 interceptions. Justin Jefferson had a great game as usual with 7 catches for 137 yards. And the Vikings defense, which had really struggled over their last couple games, they played really well, allowing just 13 points and 227 total yards. They also forced 2 turnovers. But while it wasn't the best win for the Vikings, a win is a win, and they enter at number 6. Getting into the top 5, at number 5, I have the Commanders. So the Commanders move up into the top 5 after they beat the Giants by a score of 27-22. The offense was pretty good, scoring 27 points. Jed Daniels threw 2 touchdowns, and the Commanders ran for 149 yards and another touchdown as a team. Then, defensively for the Commanders, they weren't great, and actually allowed Daniel Jones to throw his first touchdown at home in 672 days. But the defense was still pretty solid, and the Commanders, after they beat the Giants, they're now 7-2 on the season, and I have them at number 5. 4th, I have the Ravens. So the Ravens enter at number 4 after a dominant 41-10 win over the Broncos. But this was a great all-around performance for the Ravens, as the offense was great, putting up 41 points. Lamar Jackson had 280 yards and 3 touchdowns. Derrick Henry had another great game with 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. And receiver Zay Flowers had over 100 receiving yards for the fourth time in his last 5 games, as he finished the game with 5 catches for 127 yards and got in the end zone twice. Then defensively for the Ravens, they haven't been the greatest so far this year, but they played really well. They held the Broncos to just 10 points and got 4 sacks. But the Ravens, after a dominant win over the Broncos, they got back on track, and I have them at number 4. Coming in at number 3, I have the Bills. So the Bills stay at number 3 after a 30-27 win over the Dolphins. It wasn't the best win for the Bills, needing a walk-off field goal to beat a Dolphins team that hasn't played that well so far this year, but the Bills, they did get the win. They won on a walk-off 61-yard field goal from kicker Tyler Bass, and that actually comes for Tyler Bass after he missed an extra point earlier in the game, yet he's somehow able to nail a 61-yard field goal to win the game. But the Bills' offense, they played well. They scored 30 points. Josh Allen threw for 235 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. And rookie running back Ray Davis had a good game with 90 scrimmage yards and a touchdown. Now, the Bills' defense wasn't the greatest, allowing 27 points and 373 total yards. But the Bills, they got another win. They've now won 4 straight games, and I have them at number 3. Second, I have the Lions. So the Lions, they remain at number 2 after they beat the Packers by a score of 24-14. But this game is actually not as close as the score may suggest, as the Lions, they really controlled this game. They took the lead in the second quarter and led the entire rest of the game. The Lions' offense was good. Jared Goff only threw for 145 yards, but he threw a touchdown and did what the Lions needed him to. The conditions also weren't great for throwing the football. The Lions, they ran the ball very well, as Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery combined for 138 yards and averaged about 5 yards a carry. And then defensively for the Lions, they were great. They allowed just 14 points against a great Packers offense, and they didn't allow a touchdown until garbage time. The Lions' defense also had pick 6. But the Lions, after a good win over the Packers, they remain at number 2, and they are very clearly the best team in the NFC. I can also understand the argument to say they're the best team in the NFL. And coming in at number 1, I have the Chiefs. So the Chiefs, they remain at number 1 after they beat the Buccaneers by a score of 30-24 in overtime on Monday Night Football. The Chiefs' offense played really well. They played their best game of the season. They scored a season-high 30 points. Patrick Mahomes threw for 290 yards and 3 touchdowns, and this was actually his first interception-free game of the season. DeAndre Hopkins also had a great game in his second game as a Chief, finishing with 8 catches for 86 yards and 2 scores. And then the Chiefs' defense didn't play their best game, but it was good enough for the Chiefs to get the win. And the Chiefs, they remain undefeated at 8-0, and they remain at number 1 in my power rankings. But those are my Week 10 NFL power rankings. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss any other upcoming videos. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.